I evicted my parents on a Tuesday morning. The notice was printed on clean white paper, folded once, and slid across the kitchen table they'd owned for 30 years, but which no longer belonged to them. My mother stared at it as if it were written in a foreign language. My father laughed once, short and disbelieving, the same laugh he used when he thought someone was being dramatic. "You're joking," he said, finally looking up at me. I didn't sit down. I stayed standing, hands loose at my sides, heart steady in a way that surprised me. "You have 90 days," I said. "Everything's in the notice." My mother's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes flicked over my face, searching for something familiar. Fear, maybe, or guilt. She didn't find it. That was when my father stopped laughing. When I was a kid, my parents used to say they believed in fairness. They said it often, like a family motto, especially when they were being unfair. My older brother Daniel was their proof that they were good parents. He was tall, confident, loud without being rude. Teachers loved him. Coaches adored him. When he walked into a room, my parents' posture changed. My mother's shoulders lifted, my father's chest expanded, like they were standing next to a reflection of themselves they actually liked. I was the quiet one, the kid who read at the table, the one who noticed things. At dinner, Daniel talked. I listened. If Daniel needed money for a school trip, my parents found it. If he needed a new laptop because the old one was too slow, my father would sigh dramatically and then make a show of transferring money. "Education is an investment," he'd say, clicking his mouse. "You'll understand that someday." When I asked for money, usually for something smaller, something practical, the answer was different. "Money doesn't grow on trees," my mother would say, lips tight, eyes already sliding away from me. "You need to learn responsibility." Once, when I was 13, I asked for help paying for a science program over the summer. It wasn't cheap, but I'd earned half the cost myself tutoring younger kids in math. I laid the brochure on the table carefully, smoothing the crease. My father didn't even pick it up. Daniel leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You? Science camp?" My mother laughed. Not unkindly. Worse, dismissively. "Sweetheart, be realistic." That word followed me for years. Be realistic. It meant, know your place. When Daniel turned 18, my parents bought him a used car. Nothing fancy, but reliable. They handed him the keys in the driveway while neighbors watched. When I turned 18, my father handed me a spreadsheet. "You'll need to start contributing," he said. "Rent, utilities, food. It's time you learned how the real world works." Daniel never paid rent. He never paid utilities. When I pointed this out once, quietly, carefully, my mother's face hardened. "Don't compare yourself to your brother," she said. "Everyone has different needs." Different needs, same house, same parents, different rules. By the time I was 22, Daniel had dropped out of college twice. Each time, my parents cushioned the fall. They paid off the credit cards he'd maxed out. They co-signed a loan he promised to repay. They let him move back home temporarily. I, on the other hand, worked 2 jobs and finished my degree at night. I paid rent every month, on time. When I got sick, I still paid. When my hours were cut, I still paid. My mother liked to remind me of that. "See?" she'd say, almost proudly. "You're strong. You don't need help." Strength, I learned, was just another word for neglect. The financial imbalance wasn't subtle. It lived in the details. Daniel's birthday dinners were at restaurants with white tablecloths. Mine were at home, my mother insisting she'd cooked because it was more meaningful. Daniel got help with business ideas. My father spent hours with him at the dining table, going over numbers, dreaming out loud. When I mentioned starting something of my own, my father nodded absently, eyes on his phone. "Focus on stability first," he said, Not everyone's cut out for risk. By my late 20s, I'd stopped asking. I saved quietly. I learned how money moved, how contracts worked, how ownership could be invisible if you weren't paying attention. That's when my parents started needing help. At first, it was small things. My father complaining about repairs. My mother sighing about rising taxes. They talked around the problem, never directly asking, but always looking at me when the conversation paused. "You're good with money," my mother said once, stirring her tea. "Unlike your brother." It was the closest thing to praise I'd ever heard from her. I helped where I could. Not with gifts, but with structure, budgets, planning. I listened. I asked questions. I noticed how often Daniel's name came up in conversations about money that had nothing to do with him. "He just needs time," my father said. "Things will turn around." They always said that. Years passed. Things never did. One evening, my father called me into the living room. Daniel wasn't there. That alone made my stomach tighten. "We're thinking about making some changes," my father said. He clasped his hands together, resting them on his knee. He looked serious, intentional. My mother smiled at me, thin and hopeful. "It's for the family," she said. I nodded, slow. "What kind of changes?" They exchanged a glance, a familiar one, the kind they used when they'd already decided something, and my role was simply to agree. My father leaned forward. "We need to talk about the house." The room felt suddenly smaller. I looked around. The faded couch, the old photos on the wall, Daniel grinning in most of them, arms slung around my parents. "What about it?" I asked. My mother reached for my hand. Her palm was warm. "We just want to make sure everything stays fair." That word again. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment, the quiet breath before the fall. And I was about to learn just how expensive family could be. They told me the house was just paperwork. That was the phrase my father used, tapping the side of a manila folder like it was empty. "Paperwork," he said again, slower this time, as if I hadn't understood the first time. "Nothing changes day to day." We were sitting in the same living room where I'd grown up. Same couch, same crooked lamp. My mother had placed 3 mugs of coffee on the table, though only 2 of us were drinking. Daniel still wasn't there. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked. My mother smiled too quickly. Her fingers fussed with the edge of a napkin. "It's just estate planning," she said. "You know, preparing for the future." The future. Another word they liked because it was vague enough to hide behind. My father opened the folder and slid out a document. It was thick. Too thick to be nothing. "We're adding your name," he said. "Well, sort of." I leaned forward, scanning the page. Legal language, dense paragraphs. My name was there, typed neatly, unmistakable. So was Daniel's. "What does sort of mean?" I asked. My father cleared his throat. "It means you'll be helping us secure the house." My eyes lifted from the page. "Secure it how?" My mother finally took a sip of her coffee. She didn't meet my gaze. "We're refinancing," she said. "Interest rates are better now. It'll free up some cash." "For what?" I asked. There it was. The pause. The space where the truth usually tried to hide. My father answered instead. "To help your brother get back on his feet." I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. "How much cash?" "It depends," my mother said softly. "But with your income, your credit, we could get a much better deal." My income. My credit. Words they'd never used when Daniel needed rescuing before. I sat back. "So, you want me to co-sign?" My father nodded. "Essentially." "And the house?" I asked. "What happens if something goes wrong?" My father waved a hand. "Nothing will go wrong." I looked at the document again, this time slower. My finger traced a paragraph halfway down the page. Why does this say joint liability? I asked. My mother's smile faltered. That's just legal language. And this? I flipped another page. Why does it say the equity can be accessed without unanimous consent? My father's jaw tightened. You're overthinking. I closed the folder gently. I want to take this to a lawyer. The room changed. My mother's face fell, not into anger, but into something wounded. Why would you do that? She asked. Don't you trust us? My father leaned back, arms crossing over his chest. This is exactly what we were afraid of, he said. You always assume the worst. I laughed once, quietly. You're asking me to put my financial future on the line so Daniel can try again. Forgive me for wanting clarity. That was when Daniel walked in. He smelled like cologne and cold air, confident as ever. He took in the scene, the closed folder, my parents' faces, my posture, and smiled. What did I miss? He asked. My mother stood immediately. Nothing, she said. We're just talking. Daniel dropped onto the armchair. About the house? He looked at me. You're in, right? I stared at him. You knew. He shrugged. Of course I knew. My father shot him a warning look, but it was too late. You knew they were going to leverage the house, I said slowly. You knew they were going to use my credit. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Look, he said, voice smooth, practiced. It's temporary. I just need a little runway. A little runway, I repeated. How much? Daniel grinned. Depends how you define little. My mother stepped between us. Please, she said, don't turn this into a fight. I looked at her. Really looked. At the tightness around her eyes, at the way she avoided my gaze. You already did, I said. They gave me 2 days. 2 days to think it over. 2 days of texts from my mother reminding me how much they'd sacrificed. 2 days of calls from my father explaining how this was an opportunity for me to finally be part of something bigger. Daniel didn't call. He didn't have to. On the 3rd day, I came back with questions, more specific ones. What happens if Daniel can't repay? I asked. My father exhaled sharply. Why are you so negative? Answer the question. My mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Then we'd adjust. Adjust how? Another pause. My father finally said it. We'd sell the house if we had to. I nodded slowly. And my liability? Well, my father said, you'd be responsible for your share. My share. Of a house I'd paid rent in for years. Of a house Daniel had lived in for free. And ownership? I asked. If I'm liable, am I an owner? My father hesitated, just for a second. That's complicated, he said. That was the moment I knew. They weren't asking me to help the family. They were asking me to insure Daniel, using my future as collateral. I stood up. I need a copy of the full agreement, I said. All of it. My mother's voice trembled. If you walk away from this, she said, don't expect things to be the same. I looked at her. They've never been the same. They sent me the documents that night. I read them alone, at my kitchen table, long after midnight. Page after page of obligations. Clauses that favored my parents. Provisions that protected Daniel. Language that tied me to a debt without granting me control. Buried deep in the text was the final insult, a clause allowing the property to be transferred without my consent under family discretion. I sat back, the room silent around me. They hadn't just planned to risk my money, they had planned to cut me out. And that was when I understood. This wasn't the betrayal. This was just the setup. I didn't confront them right away. That surprised even me. Instead, I did something I'd learned to do very well over the years. I went quiet. No calls, no arguments, no dramatic ultimatums. I told my parents I needed time, that work was busy, that I was thinking things through. My mother accepted this with visible strain. My father accepted it with relief. Silence, to them, felt like compliance. To me, it felt like space to breathe and to look. I printed every document they'd sent me and spread them across my dining table like puzzle pieces. I bought highlighters. I read each page slowly, out loud sometimes, forcing myself not to skim. Legal language has a way of hiding intent behind politeness. That's when patterns started to emerge. Clauses repeated with small variations. Cross-references that redirected responsibility. Words like discretion, authority, beneficiary. Each one leaned the same way, away from me. One evening, after hours of reading, I noticed something that made me stop breathing for a moment. There was a reference to an amended will. Not the will. An amendment. Executed 2 years earlier. 2 years ago, Daniel had moved back in, temporarily. 2 years ago, my parents had started talking to me differently about money. I stared at the line until the letters blurred. They'd never mentioned a will. The next morning, I called my mother. "Do you have a copy of your will?" I asked casually, as if I were asking for a recipe. There was a pause. I could hear her swallow. "Why would you need that?" "I'm trying to understand the bigger picture," I said. "You said this was about fairness." Another pause, longer this time. "Your father handles that," she said. That afternoon, I called my father. "The documents reference an amended will," I said. "I'd like to review it." He sighed, slow and heavy. "You're digging into things that don't concern you." "If I'm tying myself financially to your house," I said evenly, "it concerns me." Silence crackled on the line. "I'll see what I can find," he said finally. He never sent it. That's when I stopped asking. I started searching instead. My parents were careful, but they were also predictable. My father kept physical copies of important things. He didn't trust computers for serious matters. I knew that because he'd told me, proudly, more than once. So I visited under the pretense of helping with taxes. My mother hovered while I worked at the dining table, offering snacks I didn't take. My father disappeared into the garage, pretending to be busy. At one point, my mother went upstairs to take a call. The hallway was quiet. I stood up slowly, heart thudding, and walked into my father's study. The filing cabinet was exactly where it had always been. I didn't rush. Rushing leads to mistakes. The bottom drawer stuck, just like it used to. I pulled harder, metal scraping softly. Inside were folders labeled in my father's neat handwriting. Property, insurance, estate. My hands shook as I opened the last one. The will was there. So was the amendment. I sat on the floor, back against the cabinet, and read. Once, twice, a third time, because my brain refused to accept it. The original will was simple. The house to be split evenly, assets divided equally, straightforward. The amendment changed everything. Daniel was named sole beneficiary of the house. Sole. There was a note attached, handwritten by my father. "Daniel will need stability. She can take care of herself." I stared at that sentence until something inside me went very still. I took photos of everything. Every page, every signature, every date. Then I noticed something else. The amendment had been witnessed by their longtime lawyer, the same lawyer who'd drafted the refinancing documents. The same lawyer whose name appeared on the contract tying me to the house's debt, without ownership. It wasn't sloppy, it was deliberate. I replaced everything exactly as I found it. When my mother came back downstairs, she smiled at me. "You're such a good child," she said. "Always helping?" I smiled back. That night, I listened to the voicemail my father had left earlier that day. I'd ignored it at the time, Now I played it again. Slower. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he'd said. "This is just how families work." I saved it. Over the next few weeks, I gathered quietly. Emails where my father referenced keeping things clean. Texts from my mother urging me not to upset Daniel. A voice message from Daniel himself, sent accidentally to me instead of a friend. "She'll sign," he said, laughing. "She always does." I didn't tell anyone what I knew. Not friends, not coworkers, not even myself really. Not out loud. Outwardly, I softened. I told my parents I was open to revisiting the agreement, that I just needed time. My mother cried with relief. My father relaxed. Daniel started talking about future plans again, already spending money he didn't have. They thought the danger had passed. In reality, I was planning very carefully. I met with a lawyer of my own, then another. I showed them everything. I asked questions and wrote down the answers. I learned the difference between moral obligation and legal exposure. And slowly, an idea formed. Justice didn't need to be loud right away. It needed to be undeniable. So I waited. I waited while my parents pushed forward with the refinance. I waited while Daniel bragged about his fresh start. I waited while they all assumed I was still the quiet one, the strong one, the one who didn't need help. I let them believe it. Because when the truth finally came out, I wanted there to be witnesses. And I wanted them to understand. This time, I wasn't signing anything blindly. I was signing their ending. The confrontation didn't happen at home. That was intentional. My parents had invited the extended family over for a small celebration, nothing official, just a good news dinner, my mother called it. Daniel was finally launching his business. The refinance had gone through. They wanted to share the moment with people who mattered, people who would listen. The dining room was full when I arrived. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. The table was crowded with food, wine bottles already half empty. Laughter bounced easily off the walls. Daniel stood at the head of the table, glass raised, soaking it all in. When he saw me, his smile widened. Confident, careless. "You made it," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Told you she'd come around." I met his eyes. I said I would. My mother hugged me too tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, like we were finally on the same side. My father nodded, satisfied. "We'll talk after dinner," he said. "Finish things properly." I smiled. "There's no need to wait." He frowned slightly, but before he could ask what I meant, my uncle clinked his fork against his glass. "Speech," he called. "Let the man of the hour speak." Daniel didn't hesitate. He stood, straightened his jacket, and launched into a practiced story. Second chances, family support, lessons learned the hard way. My parents watched him like he was a miracle they'd personally engineered. "And of course," Daniel said, lifting his glass toward them, "none of this would be possible without Mom and Dad, always believing in me." Applause rippled around the table. My father beamed. My mother dabbed at her eyes. That was my cue. I stood. The sound wasn't dramatic, just a chair sliding back, but it cut through the noise anyway. Heads turned. Conversations faded. "I'd like to say something too," I said. Daniel looked surprised, then amused. "Sure," he said. "Go ahead." I felt calm, almost detached. Like I'd already lived this moment in my head enough times that reality had finally caught up. "I just want to clarify something," I said, my voice steady. "Since tonight is about family support." My father shifted in his seat. "Now isn't—" "I think it is," I said gently. I reached into my bag and placed a small stack of papers on the table. Neat. Organized. "What's that?" my aunt asked. "Documents," I said, "about the house." The room stilled. My mother's smile froze. Why would you bring that up now? Because this is when everyone's listening, I said. I turned to Daniel. You've been telling people this business is yours, that you earned it, that the house was never at risk. Daniel laughed, uneasy. I mean, it was, I said. Very much so. I picked up the first document and slid it across the table toward my uncle who worked in finance. This is the refinance agreement, I said. Notice the joint liability clause. Notice whose credit secured it. My uncle adjusted his glasses, scanning the page, his brow furrowed. I didn't own the house, I continued, but I was responsible for the debt. A murmur moved through the room. My father stood abruptly. This is private, he said sharply. Sit down. I didn't. I picked up the next page. This is the amended will, I said. Executed 2 years ago. My mother's face went pale. It names Daniel as sole beneficiary of the house, I said, and removes me entirely. My cousin gasped. Someone whispered, Is that true? I slid the handwritten note forward last. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. She can take care of herself. Silence swallowed the room. Daniel stared at the papers, then at my parents. What is this? He asked. For the first time, his voice wasn't confident. It's the part you weren't supposed to see, I said. My father's mouth opened, closed. He looked around, realizing too late that the audience he'd wanted was now the worst possible one. This is being taken out of context, my mother said weakly. We were just planning, I said, carefully. I took a breath. I have recordings too. Messages, emails, all confirming that I was expected to sign away my financial future without ownership or consent. My uncle looked up from the documents. This would never hold, he said quietly. Not ethically, and not legally. My father's shoulders sagged. Daniel shook his head, backing away from the table. You said this was handled, he snapped at them. You said she was fine with it. I was never fine, I said. I was silent. I turned to my parents. You laughed when I failed. You told me I was strong because it was convenient. And when I finally had something you needed, you tried to take it. My mother covered her mouth, eyes shining. We were just trying to help your brother. At my expense, I said. Again. I reached into my bag one last time and placed a final document on the table. This, I said, is the eviction notice. My father looked down at it slowly, like his neck couldn't quite manage the movement. I own the house now, I said. Legally, cleanly. I bought out the debt before the refinance finalized, using the same clauses you thought protected you. My uncle let out a low whistle. Daniel sank into his chair. You have 90 days, I said, meeting my parents' eyes. After that, you'll need somewhere else to live. No one spoke. My father's face had gone gray. My mother couldn't look at me at all. Daniel finally did. You planned this, he said, hollow. Yes, I said, because you never thought I would. I picked up my bag and pushed my chair in. As I walked toward the door, no one stopped me. Behind me, the celebration sat untouched. Cold food, full glasses, and a family that finally understood the cost of laughing at the wrong child. And this time, they couldn't look me in the eyes. They didn't call the next day, or the day after that. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't mine to carry. 90 days is a long time when you're watching your past pack itself into boxes. I didn't go back to the house while they were there. I didn't need to. My lawyer handled the logistics. Notices were sent. Timelines confirmed. Everything clean. Everything documented. Justice, I learned, is quiet when it's done properly. My mother tried once. She left a voicemail a week after the dinner. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I don't understand how things went so wrong, she said. We did our best. I listened to it twice. Then I archived it. Understanding had never been the problem. Daniel texted me late one night. "You didn't have to do it like that." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I did. You just didn't think I would." He never responded. Word traveled fast after that. Family dinners I wasn't invited to. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room. A few relatives reached out quietly. Awkward messages that tried to balance sympathy with discomfort. "I didn't know," my aunt said over coffee one afternoon. "I always thought, well, I thought you were okay." I smiled at her. I was. That's why no one noticed. My parents moved out on a gray Thursday morning. I watched from my car across the street as movers carried out boxes, 30 years of choices reduced to cardboard and tape. My father stood on the porch for a long time, hands in his pockets, staring at the house like it might apologize. My mother never looked up. Daniel wasn't there. When the house was empty, I walked through it alone. The rooms echoed. The walls looked smaller without furniture, without noise. I paused in the doorway of my old bedroom, the one that had never really been mine, always temporary. I closed the door gently. That night, I slept in the house for the first time. Not as a guest, not as an obligation, as the owner. It felt quiet, not lonely, honest. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. I felt lighter. No more calculating how much of myself I needed to give to keep the peace. No more rehearsing conversations that would never go my way. The role I'd been cast in, the reliable one, the strong one, the invisible one, was finally over. My parents tried once more, through a letter this time. Handwritten, careful. They wrote about regret, about misunderstanding, about love. They didn't write about the will. They didn't write about the contract. They didn't write about the years they'd laughed when I failed and leaned on me when I succeeded. I folded the letter and put it away, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. Some apologies are just another attempt to rewrite the story. I didn't need a new version. I already had the truth. Months later, I ran into my father at a grocery store. He looked older, smaller. When he saw me, he froze, like he wasn't sure whether I was real. "I didn't recognize you at first," he said finally. "I know," I said. He hesitated. "You seem different." "I am," I said. "I stopped trying to earn my place." He nodded slowly, eyes dropping to the floor. For the first time, there was nothing he could teach me, nothing he could take. We stood there a moment longer, then parted without another word. That was enough. As for Daniel, I heard through others that the business didn't last. Something about poor planning, bad luck, the usual explanations. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. And distance, I learned, is its own kind of peace. I renovated the house slowly, not to erase the past, but to make room for something new. I painted over old colors, let in more light. I kept one photo on a shelf, not of my family, but of myself, younger, holding a stack of books and looking unsure. I liked that kid. They survived. Sometimes people ask if I regret it, if it was too harsh, if family should mean forgiveness no matter what. I tell them this: love that costs you your future isn't love, and silence, when chosen, is strength. My parents laughed when I failed. Years later, when the truth stood in front of them, documented, witnessed, undeniable, they couldn't look me in the eyes. I could. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.